A man died on a beach in Adelaide in 1948, and every single label had been cut from his clothes. No wallet, no hat, no name. Hidden in a secret pocket sewn into his trousers was a scrap of paper that read, "It is finished." They call him the Somerton Man, and for 74 years, nobody could tell you who he really was because somebody made sure of that. I'll show you how close we've come to an answer and why nobody's calling it confirmed. Here's the scene, exactly as it was found. 6:30 in the morning, December 1st, a stretch of beach called Somerton Park. A man sitting against the sea wall, legs stretched out, ankles crossed, like he'd simply sat down to rest and never got back up. Witnesses the night before had seen him lying in almost that exact spot. One man even watched him for half an hour and said he never moved, not even to wave off the mosquitoes. When police finally examined him, the details got stranger. Mid-40s maybe, athletic build, hands that had never done manual labor, freshly shaved. And here's something that specifically bothered the coroner: his shoes were spotless, freshly polished, not the shoes of a man who'd supposedly been wandering a beach town all day. Expensive clothes, neatly worn, and every single tag cut out, not torn out in a hurry. Cut carefully. So here's the first real question. What kind of person plans that carefully and still ends up dead on a public beach? The autopsy is where it gets genuinely disturbing. His organs told a story his blood tests couldn't back up. His spleen was 3 times its normal size. His liver was flooded with blood. Every sign pointed to a fast, violent poisoning, the kind of internal damage you'd expect from something extremely toxic. But when the pathologist tested for actual poison, nothing. No trace of anything foreign in his system at all. The coroner's final word on the cause of death was almost a shrug. Death could not have been natural, full stop. Not murder, not suicide, just not natural. Which meant somebody in 1948 had used something that could kill a healthy man in hours and leave no evidence of itself behind. That's not incompetence. That's a very specific kind of knowledge. 6 weeks later, a brown suitcase turns up in a railway station locker, checked in that same morning by someone matching his description. Inside, scissors sharpened to a point, a table knife filed down into a short blade, a stencil brush, the kind used by ship's officers to mark crates and cargo, and a spool of an unusual wax thread, the exact same thread used to repair the pocket lining of the trousers he died in. Whoever packed this suitcase was careful, deliberate, almost professional. There were name tags too: T. Keene, stitched into a tie, a laundry bag, and undershirt. Police chased that name for months. Nobody named Keene was ever missing. It went nowhere because it was never meant to go anywhere. It was a name built to be found and to lead exactly nowhere. Here's the detail that changes everything and almost got missed entirely. Months into the investigation, someone finally noticed his trousers had a second pocket, a tiny one, sewn shut, hidden inside the waistband, exactly where a normal search wouldn't find it. Inside it, a single, tightly rolled scrap of paper. 2 words printed in an elegant type: Tamám Shud. It's Persian, from a famous book of poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Translated, it means "it is finished," usually printed on the very last page, the closing line of the whole book. Someone had torn it out and sewn it into a pocket built specifically to hide it. Think about that for a second. Not lost, not dropped. Hidden on purpose by a man who apparently wanted the last thing anyone ever found on his body to be a message that the story was already over. Weeks after that, a man walks into a police station holding a copy of that exact book, the Rubaiyat, missing its final page, which he says he found tossed onto the back seat of his unlocked car, parked near the beach, right around the time of the death. And in the back cover, in pencil in capital letters, is 5 lines of nonsense. No spaces, no punctuation, letters that don't spell any word in any language anyone has ever found. In 1978, Australia's own military cryptographers took a serious crack at it. Their official conclusion: either it's a code with too little text to ever crack, or it's the private shorthand of someone who was, in their own words, of a disturbed mind. Nobody has broken it, not in almost 80 years, not once. But the book has one more thing in it: a phone number, faintly penciled in, mostly rubbed away. Police traced it anyway. It belonged to a young nurse named Jessica Thompson who lived just a few streets from where the body was found. When they asked her about it directly, she said she'd never met the man. Fair enough, except years later, a detective showed her a plaster cast made of the dead man's face, and by his own account, she looked like she was about to faint. She turned away. She wouldn't look at it again. She was never charged with anything. She never explained the phone number or the reaction, and she took whatever she knew to her grave in 2007. So for decades, that's where it sat. A body with no name, a code nobody could read, and one woman who clearly knew something she was never going to say. Now here's where science actually gets us somewhere, just not all the way. In 1994, decades after the original autopsy, a senior forensic pathologist reviewed the case with modern eyes. His conclusion: the poison was very likely digitalis, sometimes paired with a related compound called wobbane. Both extracted from plants, both attack the heart directly, and in 1948, both were something you could buy at a pharmacy without much explanation at all. That single finding answers one of the oldest questions in this case. How do you poison someone and leave nothing behind for a 1940s toxicology lab to find? You use something the lab wasn't even looking for. It's not a smoking gun. But for the first time, one piece of this case actually made sense. Meanwhile, the identity question turned into its own circus. Over the years, at least 8 different people confidently told police, "That's him." A missing woodcutter, a merchant sailor, a Swedish laborer. Every single one fell apart under a second look: wrong scars, wrong hands, wrong age. By the early 1950s, police had logged over 250 public solutions to the case. Not one of them held up. So if he wasn't any of them, who was even left to ask? Enter Derek Abbott, an engineering professor at the University of Adelaide who, for reasons even he has trouble fully explaining, became obsessed with this case in the 2000s. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have subpoena power. What he had was the internet, a genealogy database, and total, borderline unhealthy persistence. He spent over a decade chasing one single idea. If nobody could identify this man by his face, his clothes, or his code, maybe his own body could still tell you, if you knew how to ask it. And the one part of him nobody had ever managed to cut out, remove, or hide was his DNA. In 2021, after years of petitioning, Abbott finally got what he needed: permission to exhume the body from its unmarked grave. Forensic scientists pulled hair, still preserved, from the plaster death mask made back in 1949. From those strands, they built a DNA profile and handed it to genetic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, who does for DNA what detectives do for fingerprints: trace it backward, generation by generation, through distant cousins who don't even know they're related, until the branches point at one specific person. On July 26, 2022, 74 years after the body was found, Abbott and Fitzpatrick announced a name: Carl Webb. Born 1905 in Melbourne, an electrical engineer, an instrument maker, quiet, solitary, by his own ex-wife's account someone who struggled badly, had attempted suicide once before, and by the end had drifted so far from everyone he knew that not one relative had reported him missing. Here's the part that gets me. He spent that night cutting the identity out of every piece of clothing he owned. He couldn't cut out his own hair. And 74 years later, That's the one thing that finally gave him back his name. Now I have to be straight with you. South Australian police have called this finding only a possible breakthrough. Not confirmed, not closed. The code in that book is still, to this day, completely unbroken. And whatever Jessica Thompson knew, she took it with her. So here's what I keep coming back to. If the only proof we have is a DNA match with no fingerprint, no confession, and nobody left alive who actually knew him, is that enough to say we finally know who he was? I genuinely don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want another case where the official story didn't hold up, I covered the Dyatlov Pass incident last time, and it's right there on screen if you want it next.